2023 might already be my personal favorite year when it comes to video games ever. So many good games have already come out this year. Resident Evil 4 Remake, Dead Space Remake, Hogwarts Legacy, Final Fantasy 16, Diablo 4, The Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom, just to name a small handful. There were even some AA games that were surprisingly really good. Amnesia: The Bunker, Aliens: Dark Descent, which is definitely one of my favorite games of the year already. But we still have a few months left in 2023, and within those months are some of the biggest, most anticipated game releases ever, at least for me personally. So in this video, I want to talk about the 5 games that I'm looking forward to the most in the remainder of 2023. But before I get too deep into this video, before I get into my actual list, subscribe. Especially if this is the first video of mine that you're watching, you should really consider subscribing because I talk about video games all the time on this page. I mostly talk about video games within the horror genre, but I do talk about different types of games every now and then. But I also talk about TV shows, I talk about movies, I do trailer reactions, that sort of thing. But just consider subscribing if that seems interesting to you. But anyway, let's get into my list. But first, I want to give an honorable mention, and that is actually for an expansion for Cyberpunk 2077 called Phantom Liberty. It's no secret that when Cyberpunk 2077 first came out, it had a disastrous launch. It barely worked for most people. Luckily for me, I had a PlayStation 5 at the time, and it worked enough for me to be able to really enjoy it. I was one of the lucky few that on launch day I could put the disc into my PlayStation 5 and actually get an experience worth experiencing. I actually really enjoyed Cyberpunk 2077 when it launched, but there came a point where I thought to myself, this game is great, I'm loving it, it has the potential to be one of my favorite games ever, but I'm not the type of person that replays games very frequently. So I decided then and there, after about 20 to 30 hours of gameplay, to stop playing Cyberpunk 2077. It was going to be torture, and it was torture, but I stopped and I told myself that I would restart it and I would play it after it got all the patches, after it got all the updates, bonus points if there was an expansion. And now we're at the point where Cyberpunk is essentially in the state that everyone wanted it to be in when it launched. So I'm really excited for when Phantom Liberty comes out and the patch that's coming out alongside it to finally get back into a game that I think could be one of my top 5 games ever. So there's my honorable mention. Now I'm gonna get into number 5. Like I mentioned before, I mainly talk about horror games on this page, and my number 5 is a horror game, and that is Alone in the Dark. I've been looking forward to this game ever since they announced it, I think last December. Despite being a huge fan of horror video games, I've never played an Alone in the Dark franchise. It's a series that I am completely ignorant to. But the demo was fun enough, the trailers look good enough to make me really curious about this game. Just bonus points that David Harbour is going to be in it. I think that's really cool. And also the actress that's starring alongside him, I forget her name, but she's an incredible actress. She was in The Last Duel, directed by Ridley Scott. She was also in Free Guy. This would be higher on my list, but for some reason in my gut, I think this game is going to be good, not great. I have a feeling, based on what I've seen, it runs the risk of being a bit cheap feeling, running a bit poorly. And based on the gameplay that I've seen, it looks like it runs the risk of being a bit clunky, a bit unoptimized. Obviously, I hope that this game is incredible, and I will be playing it day one. I will be reviewing it on this channel, but my expectations are relatively low, so that's why it's in the number 5 place. Number 4 on my list is a game that I feel like not many people at all are looking forward to, and that is Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora. I absolutely love the universe of the Avatar movies, and I absolutely love those first 2 Avatar movies. I'm just so excited to have a new huge universe to just get consumed into. And this game is an open world game made by Ubisoft, and a lot of people say, and I don't think they're necessarily wrong, that this is going to be a Far Cry with an Avatar skin. I think this game runs the risk of being very shallow, very bland, very boring after a certain amount of hours. But with that being said, I hope that it's good. I hope that I feel like I am an avatar. I hope that it feels like I live within the world of Pandora. I love just the aesthetic of the universe, the aesthetic of the military vehicles and military weapons. I like the whole idea that you get to learn the Na'vi fighting style or the military fighting style and use 2 types of weapons. I'm not stupid. I know chances are this game isn't going to be great, but I just hope it is. And just the fact that I get to play a game set within this universe is enough for me to make this game my number 4. Number 3 on my list is Spider-Man 2. When Spider-Man 1 came out in 2018, it was my second favorite game of that year, losing to God of War 2018. But it was probably the game that I had the most fun in when it comes to gameplay. In terms of gameplay, it's one of the funnest games I've ever played, period. And of course, I'm looking forward to Spider-Man 2. I feel like it has the potential to be far better than the first one, and that's saying a lot because that first one is arguably a 10 out of 10 game in most people's opinions. I'm excited to be able to swap between Peter Parker and Miles Morales. I'm excited for all the new villains. Venom, obviously, is one of my favorite Spider-Man villains of all time, if not my favorite, so I'm so excited to see him as the main villain. And I don't know much about Kraven the Hunter, so I'm really curious to see his presence within this universe. This game might be my favorite game of 2023. It has the potential to be. But the reason that it's not higher up on my list, the reason that it's number 3, is because in terms of gameplay, the wow factor I feel like isn't going to be there because I already played the first Spider-Man game and I already played Miles Morales. And when it came to that first Spider-Man game, I'm not saying the majority of my enjoyment was because of just my mind being blown because of how fun the gameplay was, but it was a large percentage. And now that wow factor, that amazement, that feeling that you get when you sit down and you play a game for the first time and you're learning, you're realizing how great it truly is, that's not going to be there for the second game because I already know that it's going to be great. I already know the swinging mechanics. I already know the combat for the most part. And that's nothing bad about the game. It's not the game's fault. It is a sequel to a game. You don't want to change everything, but it just makes it so I'm less excited for it because a lot of the initial wow factor isn't going to be there. Number 4 for me is Alan Wake 2. I think Resident Evil 4 Remake is probably going to be my personal favorite horror game of the year. But if there's any game that's going to compete with it, it might be Alan Wake 2. Now, wait a minute. I'm remembering that Dead Space Remake also came out this year and how just incredible that game was. And now I'm just realizing that this might be the best year for fans of horror video games for as long as I can remember. Horror gaming took a back seat for a long time. There wasn't that many survival horror games coming out, and the ones that were coming out weren't that great. But I feel like when Resident Evil 7 Biohazard came out in 2017, and PT, that demo, also came out, it just revitalized people's interest and gaming studios' interest in making horror games. And now here we are in 2023, getting not 1, not 2, not 3, but probably 4 just incredible horror games released this year. And horror games of quality too, not even just like indie games that are good for the most part, but kind of cheap. I mean good horror games with a good production value behind them. I really, really like Alan Wake. I played it way back in the day, and I recently replayed the remastered version, and I still liked it, but I didn't like it as much as I remembered liking it. It was a lot more action focused than I remember it being. But the studios behind Alan Wake 2 said that this sequel is going to very much be a survival horror game, and I am so excited for that. The trailers look incredible. I'm glad that it's still going to have a really strong plot, and the gameplay looks like they took a lot of inspiration from the newer Resident Evil games, and that's certainly not a bad thing in my opinion. I've said this before in my Alan Wake 2 trailer reactions, but I'm going to say it again there. It's just such a shame there's not going to be a physical copy. I am a physical collector. I like having a physical item to show off the money that I spent, and it depresses the shit out of me that I have to just have a digital copy of a game. I want to hold the case. I want to put it on the shelf next to my other horror games. I want to just know that I own it, know that it's part of my collection. So please, release a physical copy of this game. And last but certainly not least is the game that I am looking forward to by far the most in the remainder of 2023, and that is Starfield. Bethesda makes some of the most all-consuming, time-burning RPGs in video game history. I don't need to tell you about Skyrim or Fallout New Vegas. If you're a gaming fan, you probably know how impactful those games are. But I'm going to say that I enjoy Bethesda games, but I've never loved them as much as just the majority of gamers seem to love them. I spent a lot of time in Fallout 3. I spent a lot of time in Fallout 4. And I really, really, really enjoy those games, but I've never loved a Bethesda game. But I truly, genuinely think Starfield has the potential to be, for the first time, the Bethesda RPG that I personally love. Because I really love space travel, and sci-fi. And that Starfield showcase that we got a few months back just blew my mind. After I watched that showcase, I actually ordered the Starfield controller for the Xbox Series X, and I have never ever done that before. I've never been interested in limited collector's edition controllers ever. I've been a gamer my whole life. I've seen a lot of just limited edition controllers come out for just lots of games that I personally loved, but never once have I cared about buying one or owning one. Until this Starfield one was announced, I needed to have it, and I haven't used it yet. I'm waiting for Starfield to come out, and I'm gonna crack this thing open, and I'm just gonna be addicted to that game for, I hope, years. But anyway, those are the 5 games that I'm looking forward to in the remainder of 2023. What games are you looking forward to for the rest of the year? Let me know in the comments, because if I didn't talk about it in this video, I might not even know this game exists or that it's coming out this year. So let me know of other games to look out for, please. And what did you think about my list? Do you think it's a solid list, or do you think there's some things in here that are laughable that anyone would even be looking forward to it? Once again, consider subscribing, and thank you for watching, especially if you watched this far.